Budget eve in Canberra, and another of the Gillard government's trumpeted goals has bitten the dust as Treasurer Wayne Swan tries to paint a believable path back to surplus. A key foreign aid target has been stalled for a second year. As part of the Millennium Goals to help the world's poor, Australia was committed to spending on foreign aid 0.5% of our gross national income by 2015-16. Foreign Affairs Minister Bob Carr has confirmed this morning that that target has been stalled now by a further year after a year last year, back to 2017-18.
The revenues have contracted, and the aid budget's going to be affected by this as much as any other area of government, but because of the support of the Treasurer, to a far less extent than I think anyone looking at revenue trends could have imagined. We are going to be increasing our aid, but not at the rate we had hoped. In economically more buoyant times. As we did last year, we'll provide all those details. It'll be publicly available.
Bob Carr's talking about a 9% increase, but what we know is $375 million, i.e. about 7%, is going to be spent on asylum seeker costs in Australia. Of the remaining 2%, we think that will simply claw back what was taken in December, because viewers might remember that the government made a snatch and grab on the aid budget in December last year and took $375 million then.
This is something they said they would do. This is something they promised. This is something they guaranteed. Not only that, Bob Carr himself said it was essential. So, I think they can absolutely be criticised and held to ridicule for not meeting their own standard, and I think that they should be condemned. And I'm sure every group that supports this increase should condemn them for the fact that they haven't met their target.
Firstly, we're bitterly disappointed to see reneging on the commitment to move again to 0.5% of GNI. We also what we've seen overnight is, or this morning, is some tweets from the foreign minister suggesting a $500 million increase in aid, but we see that as pretty disingenuous. We expect to see $375 million of that actually hived off to support asylum seekers here.
Well, we've already seen a significant increase in the growth of foreign aid under Labor. We've grown from 0.3, which was the maximum it ever got to under the last Liberal government, and we've grown the aid budget to 0.37% of GNI. Yes, we're slowing down and getting to the 0.5, which personally I'm very disappointed about, but we are already a very long way ahead of the coalition on our commitment to foreign aid.
We have always been committed to foreign aid. We'll continue to be committed to foreign aid, but we're not going to play a really cruel hoax on people within our region and more broadly within the global community, nor are we going to play a cruel hoax on people who work in this industry, which is what the government has done.
And really what's holding us back is clear leadership to make that happen. One of the things we know in terms of delivering quality aid is that consistency is the most important thing. To see a chop and change in the budget each year, renege commitments each time, really affects our ability to make the impact we want to see.
We can be very proud of the fact that the amount of the aid budget being used to sustain asylum seekers on Australian soil is being capped. This is something the aid community asked us to do. It's difficult given the sheer cost, the budgetary impact of arrivals in Australia, but nonetheless the Treasurer has agreed to cap it at the figure it was at last year.
That Australia is spending twice the rate of money on asylum seeker costs, domestic asylum seeker costs from other OECD countries. And what's more, the OECD released a report just last week on Australia's aid program, gave it a clean bill of health, but said that money diverted for asylum seeker costs was disruptive to programming and the government wasn't being transparent in how it was being spent.
Well, it's being capped. Yes. That's the important point, and it's being spent on the sustenance of asylum seekers who end up on Australian soil. For this reason, supporting them here is exactly the same principle as supporting them in a refugee camp with blankets and food and child protection, emergency accommodation, medical services somewhere else.
It is acceptable within international guidelines that supporting refugees when they arrive on your shores is part of the foreign aid problem. But in an ideal world, I wouldn't want to draw those boundaries in that way.
Now, this is not necessarily a very comfortable thing for the Prime Minister to have to back, is it?
Well, the Prime Minister has been appointed by the UN Secretary-General to be a champion for the Millennium Development Goals. These are the goals that the world leaders committed to helping halve global poverty by the year 2015. So now we've got the government pushing out its dates by second time in a row, 2 years. We've got it diverting money, it looks like 7% every year, to domestic asylum seeker costs. So it's not a great look for the Prime Minister to be championing global poverty and helping halve it overseas, but then cutting effectively the expenditure at home.
The rest of the world sees it. Australia is a very generous donor. Australia is in the front ranks of donor countries. No one sees it any other way. And countries recognise, don't forget, across the OECD, there's been an average 4% reduction in aid, an average 4% reduction in aid. Now look at Australia, and it's up 9.6%. That only invites a generous assessment.